So we're live now, Mason?
Yep, you're good to go.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to day 5 of our annual meeting. Unfortunately, we're not in person, as we all well know. But I think the virtual format has worked out really well for us. So I'm Dennis Zabaglo, I'm from the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and humbly serving as your chair for the time being. And so we are going to go ahead and get started with our meeting. Mason, if you want to go ahead and make me the presenter. And, all right. So let's do a little bit of year in review. For some of us that are new to the Western Regional Panel, I know we had a few people. This is their first meeting when we had the happy hour the other day, which was really cool. Thank you, Elizabeth, for setting all that up. But just starting out with WRP's mission. We're protecting Western aquatic resources by preventing the introduction and spread of non-native invasive or nuisance species into Western marine, estuarine, and freshwater systems, the coordinated management and research activities of state, tribal, federal, commercial, environmental research entities, industries, and other regional panels. So it's a broad net we have, and I think we've done a great job of embracing that mission. And so on a little bit of a somber note, I did want to take a moment to recognize Wayne Baldwin. Many of you know him, and whoop, what happened here? Are you not seeing my slides anymore?
We can see them.
Dennis, I can see your slide.
Oh, okay, cool. There we go. Sorry, I hit the wrong button, but wanted to recognize Wayne Baldwin. He unfortunately has passed away. I think many of you know him and were able to benefit from his passion and dedication to fighting invasive mussels throughout the West. He was a longtime president of the Boat Owners Association in Lake Mead and served as a technical advisor to the recreation area and really got the ball rolling for us. And so it's a sad day for sure, but I think recognizing his work, if we can just have a couple moments of silence, please. Okay, thank you. And there's a post on Facebook that has a cool article from the New York Times back in 2008 when this all first started, but we wouldn't have the success we have without Wen. And so I think a good way to recognize everything he's done and to recognize the hard work that our membership and colleagues have contributed to this effort, the executive committee has decided to create an annual award in an award in Wayne Baldwin's name. Maybe not annual, but when it's necessary or deserved. And for the first year of this new award and a commitment to excellence, if you will, I can't think of a better person to receive the first one than our own Elizabeth Brown. She is, as you know, I think, is no longer part of the Western Regional Panel in an official capacity, has moved on from the state of Colorado to the North American Invasive Species Management Association. And so we're still lucky to have her with us, and you'll be hearing from her later today, but Elizabeth has helped this organization grow, become a family. We're all friends. And so I just wanted to thank her and give her this award for commitment and excellence in Wayne Baldwin's name. So Elizabeth, thank you. And we expect to keep you part of our family. So moving on to what the panel does.
Thank you.
Don't cry.
You made me cry.
Well, and that's what the power of this group is, that we've all become great colleagues, obviously, but more so friends. And so I consider Elizabeth one of my most respected colleagues, but also a great friend. And so I think that's what makes this a really powerful group. And so back to the business at hand. Per the National Invasive Species Act, the Western Regional Panel was identified in that act And we identified priorities for the Western region in respect to aquatic nuisance species or aquatic invasive species. We make recommendations to the task force. The task force is a federal advisory committee that was formed for with all the federal agencies that have some sort of charge with invasive species. And then there's I believe there's 13 federal members with 13 ex officio members. And so my agency is one of those that's dedicated to Western issues on the task force. So we have good representation on the task force. And so each year we make recommendations to the task force, and we'll be doing that in a future call out to members. This year's meeting for the task force will be in December, so we've got a little bit of time to craft our recommendations. We coordinate as much as possible. I think we've got a lot of good examples of how we've done that, not only with our Western partners and the building consensus effort that many of you were part of, but also with the boat industry and coordinating with the federal government as well. And then developing emergency response strategies and providing advice to the public. We all have engagement with the public about our rules and requirements, but also the importance of what we do and why we do it. And then we have an annual report that we submit to the task force, and this will be forthcoming as well. So in regards to the task force, there's 6 regional panels that make up the task force, with Western Regional Panel being one of them. And we generally have spring and fall meetings and periodic calls. And what we've done over the last several years is we've had all panel meetings, which is usually the day before the task force meeting. Susan Pasko from US Fish and Wildlife Service coordinates that effort, and we've had great sit-down conversations amongst the panels on ensuring we have a shared voice and coordination, and making sure our priorities are recognized amongst each other and finding opportunities to coordinate and collaborate. And then of course all the panels implement aspects, or I'm sorry, the task force has a strategic plan that was recently updated. And so a lot of our recommendations follow the strategic plan. So this spring meeting was going to be hosted by the Northeast panel back in May, but unfortunately that had to be canceled due to global circumstances, but we will be having the fall meeting in early December, and that will be held virtually. And then the task force also has committees for control, early detection, rapid response, outreach, prevention, and research. And I believe there's Western participation on each of those committees. So we have good representation from the West at the federal level. And then the WRP itself has committees and work groups. Of course, you have your executive committee. We're responsible for the governance of the panel with 9 elected members. Currently, we have 1 vacancy that will be filled after today, and with myself and Martha filling in as chair and vice chair. And then we have our standing committees that are created by the executive committee, dealing with long-term topics, and then we have liaisons from the executive committee to those committees as well, and those work groups with a specific task, ad hoc committees, if you will, and they're developed and dissolved by the executive committee based on completion of the task. So here's our current organizational structure. You have the executive committee and then the standing committees and the working groups. So we have a standing committee with the annual meeting. So I want to thank everyone that was part of that annual meeting for really having to shift gears. And so we'll recognize all that effort. So I wanted to thank you for putting this virtual meeting on. I think it's gone on tremendously well. Very few glitches, which is always expected, but gosh, I'm just grateful for everyone on the annual meeting committee that's been able to do this. We've had over 100 people attending on most days, and so that's fantastic. And then of course we have our coastal committee. You'll be hearing from Nicole Dobroski later on today, and you heard from Christiani hosted the coastal session, I believe on Wednesday. And then we have our Decon think tank committee. Did some great work this year with implementing COVID standards into our inspection and decontamination protocols. A lot of coordination, a lot of hard work. that I think really resulted in some great products. And our Education and Outreach Committee, and then Membership and Communications are those standing committees. And our current working groups, we have the ED&A group, in which we heard from yesterday, and then fire protocols. Certainly these times in the West, especially on the coast, well, everywhere in the West really, fire is a huge issue that we're all suffering from. And so ensuring we have that coordination for protection is critical. So here are the chairs of your working groups, with Tammy Davis on the annual meeting, Christiani at Coastal, Robert Walters from Colorado on the Decon Think Tank, Adam Sepulveda from USGS at ED&A, and Monica from Texas with Education, Kate Wilson from Montana on fire protocols, and John Wolschleger from National Park Service on membership. And then you can see your XCOM liaisons to those committees. So when we have our routine executive committee calls, we have updates from those various working groups. So here is your executive committee. We wanted to have an opportunity today to let everyone turn their camera on, because we have several people in the audience participating, and even though we can't see each other in person, it'd be nice to put cameras on, but given the limitations of the format, we're not able to do so. But please continue to follow the Facebook post if you haven't already. There's some fun stuff happening there. Maybe we can maintain that for a couple days to post some pictures or fun things or updates that you may want to provide outside of your normal update. But here are your current executive committee, as I mentioned, myself and Martha, with Glenn Dolphin from the Oregon State Marine Board, Blaine Parker from the Columbia River Intertribal Commission, Tom Wolf from Montana, Stephen Phillips from the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. If you saw on the first slide, there was a little bit of a typo. He is not Professor Phillips from Washington State University. He is still the Quagga czar from PSFMC. And then John Wolschleger from National Park Service, and Allison Zach from the state of Nebraska. And of course, fantastic job by Mason this week as our WRP coordinator from the Invasive Species Action Network. And I think it's cool that we have this executive committee has a special advisor to the committee, and Elizabeth Brown. So we're grateful that she's still providing her expertise and insight and institutional knowledge to us. She's a great asset that I will force her to continue to be available. So some objectives for the executive committee this past year, the update on QZAP. A huge lift, and thank you, Elizabeth, for all the hard work there, and all of you that have made the document better, providing comments and insight there to your respective states and regions and organizations. And we'll be hearing from Elizabeth a little bit later today on that QZAP. And then facilitate dialogue between Coastal Committee and the ANS Task Force members regarding VIDA. A lot of concern with VIDA, especially on the coastal side of things, and we'll be hearing from Nicole a little bit later today on an update for that. And then kind of some things to do, complete the WRP organizational standard operating procedures, SOPs, and then a 4-year review of the bylaws. And so we'll be looking to do that soon, and we'll be needing voting members to participate in those, as we'll need kind of official capacity to update those things. So more on that to come. So a little bit of timeline since we last met in Missoula. We had our annual meeting and continued that work on QZAP. We had the task force in November 19, where we provided updates and recommendations. And continuing work on QZAP. We had a WSCI meeting, which is the Western Invasive Species Coordinating Effort. We've met on a fairly routine basis, going through QZAP from the state's perspectives. And the National Marine Manufacturers Association during NISA, which is the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. You'll see some of us here last year. I think that's Elizabeth, Stephen, myself, and Tom Wolf were able to participate in a boating caucus that was put on by the National Marine Manufacturers Association. We had a kickoff by Congressman Garamendi of California, who's very passionate about aquatic invasive species issues. And so we had a great attendance there, a lot of staffers and members that were able to participate, continuing our messaging and collaboration with the boat industry. And then, of course, the world changed in March, and a lot of us had to cease operations, but we maintained our coordination. We had, I think, weekly calls amongst the programs that had inspection and decontamination programs. And so it was a great opportunity for us to share ideas, thoughts, lessons learned, if you will, as we move through going through protocols under COVID constraints. We did have our member call in April, which was well attended, so thank you very much. And the executive committee special session on the structure, and as of now, we voted to not change that. So continuing with the timeline, as I mentioned previously, the normal May task force meeting was postponed or canceled, and we did vote to dissolve the lab working group and the seaplane working group. The tasks were completed, and the seaplane effort and focus will be now handled by the task force, and so they're looking at conducting a risk assessment of seaplanes on a nationwide basis. And then with the lab group, they finished the protocols, and many of them have now moved on to that eDNA working group I mentioned. And the sad news with Elizabeth resigning from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but as I mentioned, we'll continue to keep her close. And the executive committee selected Martha and myself to serve as chair and vice chair for the time being, and kept Elizabeth as that special advisor, as I mentioned. And then in July, WAFA, the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, passed a resolution supporting the use of hot water for decontamination and not the use of chemicals in watercraft decontamination. There was a lot of effort here as well, a lot of commenting by this group and Whiskey that provided good insight and good feedback and recommendations that WAFL accepted, and we're grateful for that. And then in August, we've continued our engagement with the boat industry, and specifically the Water Sport Industry Association, WSIA, that many of us have participated in their meetings and presentations. They are specifically a group that represents the towboat community, so wakeboard boats, personal watercraft, water skiing, things like that. And so we sent a letter to them from the executive committee that encourages them to support future development and technologies and advancement when it comes to their boats and aquatic invasive species transport. As I think we all know, ballast boats are a significant risk to us, but also require a lot of work because they always hold a little bit of water, and the decontamination is a strain on our resources. And then here in September, we're a month earlier than last year, but now we have our virtual annual meeting. I think we've learned a lot from this, and perhaps ways to incorporate the virtual setting for our mid-year call, make it a mid-year virtual meeting. I think the platform has worked well, and we'll continue to look at different platforms and ability to have more interaction amongst the attendees. And so hopefully next year we'll be in Alaska and continue our collaboration and coordination and see each other face to face and share a beer or cocktail together. It's one of my favorite things. But coordinating the coordination is one of the main things that we do at the Western Regional Panel. And so all the organizations that you see here, we have active engagement at very high levels in order to continue the good work of our mission. With other panels and the task force, as I mentioned, the boat industry has been critical, and having that engagement with the fish chiefs is also critical. But then also with the organization that Elizabeth Brown now represents, and they have a wide footprint, and so having them as a partner is going to help our efforts even more. And so we'll continue to work with all of these groups and make recommendations where possible, and provide the updates to you on the activities with the partnerships with those organizations. So as part of being a member, we do have monthly email updates that's distributed by our coordinator, Mason. with notes from the executive committee, and we'll have our mid-year call in April, and hopefully we'll have that as a virtual setup. And we encourage you to participate in committees. We need that feedback. We have dozens and dozens of voting members, and so it's important to make sure your voice is heard and provide the insight from your specific organization that we may not be aware of. We certainly encourage participation at all our meetings, and so really grateful for the turnout this week. And we will be filling a vacant member spot here momentarily, along with a new member of the executive committee. And so if there's any thoughts and concerns and questions and ideas, feel free to contact any one of us. We're always interested in ways we can improve our coordination, improve our mission, improve the way we achieve goals on our mission. So please reach out. So thank you. This has been a trying year for sure. I hope you're all well and staying safe, and we will all hopefully be in Alaska next year. So thank you very much. We really appreciate all of your desire and passion and commitment to this, and truly making it an effort we can all be proud of. So thank you, and I am going to turn it over to Mason.
All right. Thank you, Dennis. Let me get my screen up here. Can you see that?
Forward slide, I can. Oh, not anymore. There we go.
All right. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the WRP budget report. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was able to provide $50,000 for the 2020-2021 salary and overhead for the WRP. The WRP contracts with ISAN, the Invasive Species Action Network, for coordination and fiscal management services. So ISAN handles all of the fiscal responsibilities, as well as coordinating all of the monthly meetings, annual meeting, helping out in those ways. And all of that money is fully expended annually. So as for the savings account, it was created in 2015. It largely comes from uncommitted support of the WRP sponsorships that cover our leftover from sponsorships that cover our annual meeting expenses. So thank you to all of the sponsors that have come through in the years past. You're great. And the funds are used for chair travel as well. So right now, the current balance of the WRP savings account is $8,333. So for actual and anticipated expenses, for the 2020 annual meeting this year, obviously virtual, we're unfortunately unable to meet in person. The primary expense was for the GoToWebinar platform, which was $1,188. Which was covered by sponsorship, a generous sponsorship from Stephen Phillips and the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, not Washington State University, just to clarify. So the chair travel for this year to the 2019, well, last year, but from this year's account, for the 2019 ANSTF meeting, and also some postage expenses, came to $1,207 total. There are, as of now, obviously no additional anticipated travel expenses in 2020. We don't see anything happening this year that's going to require travel. For sponsorship of the annual meeting, we did not solicit income from our sponsors. and we received no sponsorship money for this year's meeting. We will be getting back to that next year. So thanks to all our sponsors for all the years you've sponsored, and we'll be talking soon. So again, as we're gonna keep with the normal projected expense of $20,000 for 2021, which would cover the annual meeting, chair travel, and coordinator travel. Of course, everything is up in the air. We don't know exactly what 2021 is going to hold as far as in-person meetings. So it's just something that we will wait and see. But right now we're going to stick with the projection we usually go with, which is about $20,000. And that is it for the budget report. If you have any questions, enter them and we can talk about it during the Q&A. But while I have the screen and while I'm here, I'd like to announce the results of the 2020 WRP elections. So for the executive committee, we've got 4 returning members: Glenn Dolphin, Tom Wolf, John Wolschlager, and Dennis Zabaglo. So congratulations. It's going to be great working with you for another 2 years. And then for the special election to fill Elizabeth's seat, Brock Shamai of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service won. Congratulations, Brock. Looking forward to working with you. And we have a new member for the WRP representing Academia Coastal, and that is Catherine Day Rivera from Portland State University. Congratulations, Catherine. And the 2019 WRP annual meeting minutes have been approved. So thanks to all of you who participated in those elections and approving those minutes. It's very much appreciated. So thank all of you. I will be passing it on now to Elizabeth Brown from NAISMA, former chair of the WRP, to talk a little bit about QZAP. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. I've stopped crying. That was incredibly kind. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I'm really grateful to have been a part of this organization for so long, and I look forward to a really exciting future. When is someone who is very near and dear in my heart, and I'm very grateful for his impact on my life and on my career, and so I will cherish that. Thank you so much. You really surprised me. All right, let's get into QZAP. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, good. All right. So, all right, today I get to present to you the updated recommendations for the Quagga Zebra Action Plan for Western U.S. waters. I'm so excited that we're at this point because really the amount of work, the amount of effort, the passion, the dedication of all of you and our partners, it's really just awesome. And you've all made a real difference. And there's a lot of work left to do, so don't get me wrong. But you really, like Dennis said, this panel should be very, very proud. Okay, so for our new friends that are with us today, let's just back up a second for those of you that don't know what QZAP is or are not familiar with the plan. So QZAP stands for the Quagga Zebra Action Plan for Western U.S. Waters. This document was requested by Senator Feinstein back in 2008. So Lake Mead detected quagga mussels in 2007, and that triggered, really changed everything for aquatic invasive species managers in the Western US. And there was a huge shift at that point. But the senator requested this plan of the ANS task force to protect Western waters. And of course, not too long after, mussels were found in Lake Mead, mussels were found in San Justo Reservoir in California. And so the plan was delegated to the Western Regional Panel to complete. There were 2 working groups that were formed. There was a writing group, and then there was a steering committee, and those were led by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And chair at the time, Eileen Rice in Montana. And so I was fortunate enough to be brand new to the Western Regional Panel and thrown on both of those steering committees, the steering committee and the writing committee. And it really kind of kicked off the next decade of work. The document was approved in February of 2010 by the ANS task force. And in 2013, we were kind of just really getting going in the building consensus in the West work group, and there was some evaluation work that was done on QZAP at that time as recommended by the ANS task force. And at that point, the membership of the WRP said, nope, we're going to let the original plan ride, and we're not going to update it at this point in time. And so the ANS task force supported that decision and voted to extend it another 5 years in 2014. And then last year, the executive committee voted at our annual meeting in Tacoma, Washington in October of 2018 to write a formal status update report for the QZAP. At the same time, we also voted to write a final report for the building consensus in the West work group. And so those were both finished by the WRP last year. And once those 2 plans were published, we kind of moved on to, okay, we've looked at the original plan. We know where we're at today. Let's take what we know and let's move forward with a new plan. So the QZAP, the original QZAP, because I'm going to kind of compare and contrast a little bit for you. The goal is the same as the status as this new plan. The goal is to summarize current strategies to address the invasion of zebra and quagga mussels in the West, and to identify and prioritize specific actions that are needed to comprehensively prevent further spread of mussels, respond to new infestations, and manage existing infestations. And there were, these were the categories, the overall objectives that the action items were grouped into, and there were 37 action items in the original plan. The status report, the intent was to document Western progress on the original QZAP action items. It was not intended to document the national progress on zebra and quagga mussel management. So I want to be just clear and transparent about that. And so the panel and our partners basically went through and looked at each action item and either classified them as an ongoing action, which is something that is started, but doesn't really have an end in sight, okay? Action items that were completed, and there were only 2 of the original action items that we said, nope, this was a start and finish project, we are done. Most of these things are ongoing. And then not started. So those were things that had not been initiated to date, and there were 6 of those in the status report. And so this was kind of the thinking as we moved into QZAP 2.0. If it's completed, it's completed. We're crossing it off the list. So those 2 things are done. We're not going to see those again. Those ongoing, then it moved over into QZAP 2.0. All right, so if there's no end in sight and this is something that has to continue, for example, containment efforts and on Lake Powell, Lake Mead, those things need to continue. They just move over, okay? And you'll see those same action items in the QZAP 2.0. Things that were not started, we looked at those 6 things and we had some real conversation about them. We decided, okay, if we have not done these things in the last 10 years, are they still important? And some were, and some weren't. And some were just in that category, not concrete. So for example, the one that always pops to mind is we had an action item in the original QZAP that said, make better use of television and radio to, educate and outreach on zebra mussel prevention, or something to that effect. But it was make better use of TV and radio. And, you know, people just didn't feel strongly that that needed to move forward. So, but there are other things in there that talk about using a variety of mediums to provide outreach and education. So a lot of that type of is specific to that action item was had in our WRP Education Committee that really kind of worked on those objectives. But anyhow, those 6 things that were not started, we kind of had some discussion about what got moved over and what didn't. And then as we were doing the QZAP status report and the building consensus report, new ideas and new needs came forward. Things that, for example, we heard great presentations yesterday on environmental DNA. That was not something we were talking about in 2008, 2009. People were using it, certainly, but it wasn't a management tool that was common and that was discussed as much as it is today. And so there were no action items in the original QZAP related to environmental DNA, and there are in this update. So again, just giving you an example. We have 55 action items in QZAP 2.0. So we went from 37 to 55. And some of the feedback that we've gotten is that we could combine and we could condense. But folks really feel like separating certain things out is more meaningful in terms of how we can measure success moving forward. And so I think the action items are pretty much, right now we're wordsmithing them, but they're pretty much what they are. They're done, I think. And I didn't put a slide in here to show how many review periods we've had. But we've done multiple rounds of review with our WRP membership, 3 or 4 at least. We've done, we had a pretty intensive workshop with WSKI, the Western State ANS coordinators, that was facilitated by Leah Elwell with ISAN back in February to really dig in on some of this. And then we've done kind of a broader review period with ANS task force members, partner organizations, participating members. So we've gone through, I want to say, 6 or so review periods. I know the current draft is draft 10. And I just want to note that, you know, Dennis talked about work groups, and we did not elect to create a work group for QZAP. The executive committee served as that work group. So I just want to thank the executive committee. Okay, so, you know, we basically had the original QZAP and the QZAP status report, and we kind of took what we learned through that process, and again, building consensus in the West. Now, for those of you that are new and don't know about building consensus, I'm not presenting on it today. It's not a part of this talk, but a large amount of the accomplishments came out of this effort that was really a partnership effort with the National Sea Grant Law Center, Oregon Sea Grant, AFWA, funded through Fish and Wildlife Service, and they had a major role in coordinating all this. There were a lot of different organizations that worked on building consensus, and the final report is on the westernregionalpanel.org website under key documents, right next to QZAP and that information. So I just want to acknowledge that, you know, almost decade-long effort that really was nested within the QZAP in my perspective. It was all QZAP related. So, and just a huge thanks to everyone who worked on that. But those weren't the only things, right? Certainly not. The Department of Interior from 2017 to 2020 had a massive effort that really shifted things in a positive way across the West. And there was just a press release out about the new strategic plan on invasive species for Department of Interior that mentioned safeguarding in the West. And so this was a really significant effort that we wanted to make sure we were being comprehensive about, not, you know, being segmented. The Army Corps of Engineers has been working through the Water Resources Development Act authorities and appropriations on supporting watercraft inspection, decontamination, monitoring, rapid response in the Columbia River Basin, now expanding to other river basins. We have the National Wildfire Coordinating Committees, AIS protocols that our WRP committee is working on. We have our Columbia and Missouri River Basin teams the 100th meridian original plan, the concept, the strategy, it was good. And we looked at that plan. So 100th meridian, you know, those panels or those basin teams that remained coordinated, you know, with the help of Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, with Fish and Wildlife Service funding, you know, those teams, those two that stayed inactive had huge productivity compared to other basins. So that was really valuable. Dennis mentioned the marine industry engagement piece of this, and I'm just looking at my clock here, so I don't go over my time because I get so excited, you guys. I could just talk about this stuff. The marine industry engagement piece, American Boating and Yachting Council, National Marine Manufacturers Association, Water Sports Industry Association. You know, a lot of our panel members, as well as folks from other panels, worked on the ABYC Technical Committee on Aquatic Invasive Species, which published a report in 2018 on how manufacturers can alter design to reduce the spread of AIS and to make inspection decon easier. Dennis talked about that in his year review. We just sent a letter supporting engineering and technology development. So that's a huge piece. We want to keep going. Obviously, everything that WISC does, there's a lot in WISC and the Western Invasive Species Coordinating Effort that is very impactful towards forwarding QZAP. And then the Western Governors Association, they held a leadership summit on invasive mussels in Las Vegas last August. And we took their final report and the action items in their final report. You will see every one of those in the QZAP 2.0. Okay, so we tried to get all these different efforts and take either what was undone or what was important, or, you know, and so if there's something we missed, please tell us, but hopefully we've captured a lot of that activity in terms of, you know, how we move forward. Okay, and the whole goal, protecting the uninfested West. And forgive the just random lines on the map. We tried to kind of draw around the infestations. And this map was produced at the end of last year, so it is just a hint out of date. We've had 14 new infested water bodies in the Western US in 2020, according to the USGS's NAS system. So, but however, the point remains the same. The red stars are the invasive infested waters with zebra or quagga mussels. The blue dots are where we know existing watercraft inspection and decontamination stations to be. So we know that prevention and containment works because the folks that are doing it are not seeing more and more infested waters. And so we want to expand, and we want to make sure that we are protecting what's important to all of the various stakeholders and all of the partners and members in the West. Okay, so there's the history lesson for you. Now getting into the purpose of QZAP 2.0 and kind of where we landed with some of this. So again, the goal is the same as the original. It's to provide that roadmap, a strategic set of regional action items to inform decision-making that stop the further spread of invasive mussels. And the thing we really tried to do differently this time, and I think we did better, I don't think we got maybe all the way there, but we did do a lot better, is making sure that our action items are measurable, making sure that we can actually quantify success and progress over time. Some of the original action items are very vague, and it's kind of hard to tell, did we do it? Did we do it well? Where are we at? So one of the next steps is to get that baseline data. Okay, so we did go down one strategy or objective, and that research and management were combined in the final copy. But the other ones pretty much stay the same. And the reason that we did that was because when we did the status update report, many really in the research and in the management of existing populations, a lot of those accomplishments came from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation primarily, and some of our other federal partners, and they kind of applied to both. So, we were kind of duplicating in those sections when we did the status report, and so it made sense to combine those in this in this 2.0 version. Okay, I am not going to read this to you. I apologize that there's so much text on the screen right now, but I wanted to just show you what the action items are if you hadn't seen them yet. And I'm just going to kind of summarize them. And then, you can read the plan, and certainly there's one more opportunity for comment before we stamp it final at the panel level. But capacity, at its simplest terms, it's about bodies, funding, legal authority, and coordination. No big surprises, okay? And again, kind of going back to a little bit back to basics, looking at the 100th meridian and there were some good discussions in the ANS task force over the last couple of years as we've been going through this, looking at how things are working in the Asian carp world as well. And a big conversation in the first QZAP was, do we need a coordinator? Do we need a person dedicated to this? And at that time we said no. Now we're saying yes. Now we're saying we really need somebody dedicated to coordinating quagga zebra mussels in the West. And the panel feels that the panel is a good place to house that person and be a neutral facilitator and coordinator. So you'll see that in this plan. You'll also see that we need to continue the basin teams, and that we need to establish, support, and coordinate new basin teams. And I will be very honest that one of the criticisms that we have heard in 2.0 is that it's not specific enough. We didn't put dots on the map and say inspection stations need to go here, 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 and here. We talked about that. We kind of tried doing that. But we really feel like that level of detail and that level of negotiation needs to happen amongst higher level leadership, as well as really be kind of figured out at the basin level. And so one of the priorities is to establish those basin teams that were established back in the 100th meridian and didn't stand the test of time or never got established to begin with. Legal authority adopting the, model legal framework and all the building consensus protocols, and addressing the issues that were identified in the federal policy options paper by NISC and ANS task force, and engaging with tribes. So, that's kind of the short story on the capacity. The biggest objective is in prevention and containment. And I want to thank Amy Benson with the USGS for creating new maps for me for the QZAP 2.0 and for updating the positive waters list in the West according to our building consensus definitions. Thank you, Amy, you're amazing. Okay, so this is not, in my mind, really anything that we haven't been chatting about for a long time. So we're going to continue doing prevention at water bodies. We're going to continue working on containment primarily in the Colorado River Basin, but also along our 100th meridian states and in the eastern US. There's a call to protect Alaska, promoting the regional WID data sharing system. Thank you, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, especially Robert Walters. You are the absolute best. And thanks to the Fish and Wildlife Service for continuing to fund that. And BOR for past funding as well. WRP issued new protocols last year through the DECON think tank for new DECON unit specs for on-demand hot water systems. So those are a call to upgrade DECON stations. Again, marine manufacturers work, equipment inspection and DECON, increasing law enforcement, and objective B just kind of goes on and on. Working on commercially hauled watercraft, working on equipment like, things that are brought in to fix dams and to do dam repair, things like that. really bolstering quality control of watercraft inspection and decontamination stations, a call to maintain and or expand the watercraft inspection and decontamination training program that is administered by Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, taught by the one and only Quagga, and of course with Wen Baldwin and Bill Zook kicking it off back in the day. Fire protocols we've already talked about, the ABYC TIS report, so and HACCP. HACCP is really important to all of us. So again, kind of some of those themes you see, it's really, QZAP 2.0 is really about, in my mind, getting the infrastructure and the capacity in place to really see broad adoption and implementation of all of these tools that have been created by the variety of organizations that have been working on this over the last decade. That's just a real theme, is this is in place, let's get it implemented, let's get it adopted, let's overcome the barriers. How do we work together to overcome the barriers? Okay, Objective C, early detection monitoring. That first one is almost like word for word from the original QZAP, expand early detection monitoring programs. Adopt building consensus protocols, expand lab expertise. If we're gonna sample more waters, we need more lab techs to analyze those samples. We have an objective on eDNA, which includes field protocols, lab standards, and decision support tools for managers. Looking at standardized training and certification for sampling technicians and lab technicians, very similar to what we do on the watercraft inspection side. Making sure folks are reporting to the USGS NAS system. One of the new things in here is having an annual monitoring forum. The Columbia River Basin has monitoring forums, and we used to, as a Western Regional, that I know BOR led one or two of them, and maybe some other organizations did as well. But getting that back, maybe not annually, but I mean, the objective right now says annual, but you know, making sure people are talking about monitoring and that this information is available and that we're having conversations. And then there's been some discussion about trying to clarify, like when we're developing new tools and we're doing research, so this kind of goes to that decision support tool concept, like making sure we understand like what we're doing for research and what we're doing for management and how they intersect and what those roles and responsibilities look like. Okay, rapid response. This looks very much like the original QZAP, a sustainable fund for mussels in the West, making sure we have rapid response plans for the Western states and basins. The Columbia River Basin has done some outstanding rapid response training, and we want to duplicate that in other basins. And again, modeling after the Columbia River Basin, they recently published an Endangered Species Act manual, and I know Fish and Wildlife Service and EPA and all sorts of organizations were involved in that, and I don't know who they all are, but that document's online and you can get it, and we want to, again, duplicate that for other basins. Research for control and management. Boy, I have to say, it's very interesting to me because as we go through these review rounds, one of the things I notice is people like to pick up the research projects and they want to put them in education, or they want to put them in prevention, or they want to put them in monitoring, and then somebody else picks them up and puts them back right in research. So for example, the social science research project, that has gone back and forth from education to research a number of times. It landed here, we're gonna leave it here, and I apologize if you want it there, but it's here. Same with risk assessment. Some folks want that in early detection, some folks want to see that in WID, prevention and containment. It landed in research. So it's here, and I think the action item is good regardless of which objective it's tied to. But there's a number of research projects that were identified, and a call to update the Dreisen and Mussel Research Priorities Workshop. It's shocking to me that was 5 years ago, but that was done in 2015. And both in research and education, there's a call to better connect with the ANS Task Forces Committee, and you're going to hear from Susan Pasko later, and to connect with other panels in order to advance priorities in the West that really are not exclusive to the West. Okay, education and outreach. The first one, and I have to say, we have our Education Outreach Committee and the Western Regional Panel is just outstanding, and they're doing a lot of work right now. So I want to thank Monica, our chair, and Allison Zach, our former chair, and all those committee members, because they've not only put a lot of work into QZAP 2.0, but they worked hard on the status report and are really trying to advance these objectives. So thank you, thank you, thank you. But this is really about, and again, we moved that social science research project, but once that gets done, then we want to take those recommendations and use them to more consistently and effectively message to our public and to decision makers to, again, change that behavior across the West. We're looking at doing a kind of going back again to 100th Meridian boater surveys, but a regional multi-state standardized survey. This one actually comes out of WFWA, that they're interested in seeing if we are incentivizing non-compliance and what sort of customer experience we could be providing to incentivize compliance with mandatory inspection decon rules. So that we think would be really interesting to learn. We want to be communicating to other regions in other parts of the country about our requirements, moving from TV and radio onto social and multimedia platforms, and of course, promoting the ANS Task Force voluntary guidelines, and then coordinating. So I said I wasn't going to read them all to you, but I read most of them to you because it's exciting. This is great stuff. Something different is evaluation. So we came up with a table, and tied to each action item, there are evaluation measures. And so if you're a WRP member, listen up right now, because we're gonna need you to help us with this. So after we get this approved, we're then going to be surveying to try to get this baseline. So for example, if we want to expand early detection programs, we need to know how many we have now. And we need to know how many waters are monitoring, and we need to define waters the same in order to count them. And so that's kind of the next step once we get this published, is to start putting that information together. And then every year, as part of our WRP annual member report, we're going to be attaching a survey so that you can either update your numbers or you can confirm that they're staying the same. And so the hope is that we are evaluating this annually, and we are looking at this and saying, okay, where are we stuck? Where are things moving? And we can kind of be making adjustments as we go, versus kind of living with a very generic plan for a very long amount of time. Okay, so that's kind of the goal with how we're going to be evaluating it. We had an implementation table going, and we did not move that forward to the final version. We did not feel that the WRP should be dictating kind of who's responsible for what. And when we did kind of the member call to say, hey, raise your hand and tell us what you can do, we didn't get a whole lot of feedback. So we thought we'd move forward without that, and let that kind of happen organically as it did in the past. Okay, so I really just want to take a minute to acknowledge everyone who has contributed. It's a long list. Again, we did not create a work group for this. We let the executive committee served as the work group for this, but just about every member and everybody in WAF and in WISKI, well, all the WISKI members are panel members too, state coordinators, contributed, and a lot of our partners and folks that just did reviews and made maps and just helped. So I really want to thank everybody. No contribution was too small, and for those of you that suffered through copy editing my original drafts, thank you, you're wonderful. But this really is a WRP team effort, And I just really want to say thank you, because I remember going through this the first time. And of course, we know so much more now than we did then. But because of all your knowledge, all your expertise, and all your passion, I think this was a smoother process this time around. So thank you. And then in terms of next step, our WRP Executive Committee meeting is at the end of this month, and our intention is to vote to approve this plan. You will be able to find this last version, version 10, up on our WRP website. It's not there now, but by the end of the day, we will get it up there. And if you have any final comments, please call, email, write, text, whatever you got to do. Get a hold of Dennis, me, Mason, and let's talk about it. And then we will be outreaching to partner organizations as opportunities arise, just like we have been doing kind of all along. We have our ANS task force meeting in December, and so we'll be sharing this information with them in December as well. And thanks to Susan for offering us a time slot for that. And then I just kind of want to end with this quote that really was in the status report, and we carried it over. Due to the multi-jurisdictional nature of Western waters, the QZAP 2.0 action items apply to various organizations, for no single entity is responsible for or capable of implementing all of the necessary actions needed to protect waters from invasive mussels and other ANS. So I want to just acknowledge the shared responsibility. And I know those of you that are in the thick of it, you feel it and you live it. That this is a shared job, and we need to be working across jurisdictions, and so many of you already are. And I mean, this list is so impressive, just to see how many folks are working on this issue and how many folks are really contributing. So I want to thank everybody. I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to continuing to work on coordinating and work on this communication. And I'm excited to see what we can do in the next 10 years. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Such great work by everyone. Really appreciate all the feedback. It's been a long road, but definitely worth it. And I think this will be really beneficial for all of us for years to come. So thank you, Elizabeth, for continuing to carry the torch on that. And I think now we are turning it over to Susan Pasko from Fish and Wildlife Service to provide an update from the task force. So Mason, if you can make Susan the presenter, and Susan, if you can turn on your webcam, we'll turn it over to you.
All right. I think I just need a little bit of feedback as far as what you are seeing, if you're able to see my slides.
Yep.
Okay, so presentation's up, great. All right, and audio is fine as well?
It is, thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to just give a quick update on the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force and what we have been up to since the last time I addressed you. So I'm going to go ahead and just give a very quick reminder of what the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force is and who we are composed of. Not a lot of detail. Dennis did a great job of giving just an introduction to who we are and what we do. But as a reminder, we are established by legislation by the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Nuisance Prevention and Control Act of 1990, reestablished in 1996. And we do consist of 13 federal members. As Dennis mentioned, anyone who really has a charge or responsibility with invasive species is invited to become a member of the task force. We are co-chaired by the Fish and Wildlife Service, where I reside, as well as from NOAA. And in addition to our federal members, we also have 13 ex officio members. of course, our 6 regional panels. And right now we currently have 5 standing committees that align with our strategic plan. In addition to that, we will occasionally form ad hoc committees that will focus on a specific issue. All right, our last meeting of the task force was in Beltsville, Maryland in November of 2019. We did have several key action items that came out of those, but primarily that meeting really focused on our new strategic plan and forming the new subcommittees to align with that strategic plan and allowing those committees to pull together annual work plans for how they're going to implement the goals and objectives of that plan in the upcoming year. In addition to those plans, we had some conversations that influenced that work, such as our conversations on the draft bylaws for the task force, as well as VIDA and the work of the Coast Guard and EPA with developing the new ballast water standards. We hope to continue that conversation in May, but like any other meetings, that meeting was postponed because of COVID, but that give our committees the opportunity to continue that work, so we'll get great updates from them at our next meeting, which is currently scheduled for December 8th through 10th. That will be a virtual meeting. The agenda is currently being pieced together right now, but you can expect to hear from our committees as far as their updates and the work they've accomplished this past year, their plans for next year, but we'll also have important partner updates. We'll have presentations on ballast water, as well as you heard, the QZAP plan is on the agenda as well. We also have some exciting work that's been going on with horizon scanning and ICS that we hope to present. So stay tuned. The agenda, as I mentioned, is in draft, and we have something ready to share. You can get it from myself or check our task force website. Okay. The last time I addressed the panel, I believe we had just passed our strategic plan for 2020 to 2025. I think I went into a lot of detail as far as what is included in that plan, which I will spare you from today. But just a reminder that we do have 6 goals, that is coordination, prevention, early detection, rapid response, control and restoration, research, and outreach and education. Each one of those goals does contain a targeted set of objectives and associated strategies that our partners and the members of the task force all work together to implement over the next 5 years. Again, the full plan, either contact myself if you'd like to see it. It's also available on the task force website. And as I previously mentioned on our last meeting, each one of our subcommittees to develop an annual work plan for these goals. And so I'm going to spend next few slides just kind of going over some highlights with what was in those work plans and the status of the items. Okay, so switching over to our first one, which is the coordination goal. This is the only one that does not have a standing committee. What's encompassed in the coordination goal really is kind of our general day-to-day operations as far as what keeps the task force running and communicating and making progress on our strategic plan. But some of the things we have been able to work on this year consist developing the first ever task force bylaws, as well as refining the accomplishment reporting process for the task force members, committees, and panels. Again, since we have entered a new strategic plan era, we need to revise how we're reporting on that plan. And of course, that information we gather does feed into the annual reports of Congress. So all 3 of those items have made progress this year, and we can expect to hear updates and discuss them at our December meeting. And the last bullet I have here is to continue to provide technical assistance for our state and interstate ANS management plans. So that is something we routinely do at Fish and Wildlife Service, is provide any guidance or input they need for that plan development or revision. This year we have worked with the states of Colorado, as well as Alabama and Indiana, to get their plans ready for potential approval at the task force level. And of course, that approval is needed for those plans to become eligible for funding. So each year, Fish and Wildlife Service does receive funds to give to the states for implementation of their plan. 2020 did see an increase in funds. We received approximately $3.84 million for state plan implementation. That money is divided evenly for any state that is eligible that applies for it, which means each plan will receive approximately $89,000 this year. Okay. All right, moving on to the prevention goal. The prevention goal is designed to develop strategies to identify, assess, and manage the risk of ANS and their pathways to prevent new introductions in the water of the United States. So some examples of the work plan outputs this committee has been working on. The first one is to work with agencies to make importation data electronically available and searchable for species imported into the United States. So right now, the Prevention Committee has a small working group that has started conversations with Office of Law Enforcement, as well as some other applicable parties, really to identify where are the challenges with making this happen, and then hopefully working towards solutions to overcome and mitigate those challenges. The next one here is to enter into national prevention practices with the responsible industry sectors. So after taking a close look at some different areas they could work on this year, this committee really focused on the issue of float planes, as this was identified as a pathway in need of a more in-depth BMP. However, to make that BMP happen, they did decide that a risk analysis is needed to help inform some of our risk management actions, as well as to serve as a scientific basis for a possible BMP. So right now we have secured some funding to make this risk assessment happen. So the committee is currently working on developing a notice of funding opportunity that will eventually be put out to grant.gov to identify someone who can do this risk assessment. So this really is a continuation of some of the work that the Western Regional Panel is doing. I know several of you have become involved with that committee and helping that NOFO happen. So thank you for that, and we hope to have a great product at the end. And a couple of last bullets for this committee here is, first of all, to establish an ad hoc committee to evaluate and implement the roles and responsibilities of the task force under VIDA. For those of you familiar with that act, there is a section in there that does refer to the task force and us engaging in this effort. We are currently waiting for updates from EPA and the Coast Guard on what they are planning for the implementation of the standards and advice from them for how we can come involved. Once we have that information, we are prepared to form a work group that really revolves around making that and pushing towards that goal under the Act. And last but not least here, one that is just beginning to start here is to assess new ANS introductions to determine where prevention measures may have been lacking, been ineffective, or resulted from gaps of authority. So this really involves putting together a series of case studies that can be used to show, why we have an introduction, what happened that could have been, or what could have happened to prevent the introduction. And this will be a great communication tool for ANS in general, but more importantly, can be used to help guide the future work of this committee as far as where they can make a difference to prevent future invasions. Okay. Moving quickly to our early detection and rapid response goal. Some of the highlights from their work plan this year. The first two really focus on work of the U.S. Geological Survey and their NAS database. The first one is developing those eDNA standards for the database, and the second one on the 3-year plan for capacity building. Both of those have been progressing, and we were receiving an update from USGS at our December meeting. But following with that has been work to develop a framework for the use of horizon scanning tools to determine U.S. hotspots that can be targeted for monitoring. This is just beginning to kick off. We do have funding secured to help us build that framework. So it's going to be, I think, a really exciting project for next year, and we'll be discussing in a lot of detail at our December meeting. The next one here is to develop a report describing where emergency response funds are currently in use and provide a model for funding for the Emergency Rapid Response Fund. So this one really has been picked up by the National Invasive Species Council. We've been supporting them the best we can and providing input, but they are the primary drivers right now as far as developing a white paper to pull that information together. We did develop a survey with them that basically was put out to state coordinators and the regional panels to try to get their information on where there are potential response funds that is being used to inform this effort. But also that survey did include a number of questions that were specific to capacity for rapid response and where the needs are. And we did that just to kind of get some ground truthing as far as where the EDR committee can make a difference and actually help our states and our partners. And one thing that really stuck out really is a need to our template and general guidance for using ICS for rapid response. So right now, this is where our committee has been just starting to have conversations to try to figure out what that guidance would look like and what type of information would be needed, so we can expect to see more work in that area in the upcoming year. All right, let's jump to Control and Restoration Committee. So this one has the goal to facilitate capacity to control established ANS populations and restore impacted habitats. So for this year, the Control Committee decided really to focus on our species ANS management and control plans. We have our state control plans, but we also have species-specific control plans. QZAP is one of them, but we also do have 9 others. Some are very recent, but some are quite dated at this point. They've probably been around since the task force was first established. So the committee is diving very in deep to do an assessment of each one of those species control plans, and is prepared to provide the task force a report as well as recommendations at the December meeting as far as if each plan should be archived because it has been succeeded by something more recent, if it needs updated, or if it is an active plan that we should continue to track and monitor its progress. In addition to that plan assessment, they are also working on drafting guidance for control plans. If we ever decided to draft additional plans to the task force, we did do guidance as far as what type of information and the structure that plan should have, something we have not yet had to this date. And the last bullet we have here is to survey members and panels for gaps of control and restoration. Save that one for the next slide, since that bullet has kind of trickled over into our research subcommittee, which is right here. All right. Research subcommittee, their main goal this year was to develop an annual priorities research list that will show both regional as well as national priorities. In addition to that priorities list, they wanted to survey members and regional panels for people who have the capacity to address those priority needs, as well as to develop a model for how those research priorities could be funded. Where that stands right now is they do have a survey that's been developed that will capture information for all 3 of these bullets. Right now we're just doing a bit of fine tuning, but we are prepared to hit the send button to that survey as soon as next week. So once it gets in your inbox, and we do anticipate it will probably get to each one of you on this call, we do think it's important for you to take the time to really give us some thoughtful input on that survey. The research subcommittee, where we're looking at the responses, they'll be looking at the priorities, they'll be looking at who's available to do those priorities, as well as the money that's available. And again, using that to form a model for how that work can actually be accomplished in the next few years. And I mentioned it also trickles over into the Control and Restoration Subcommittee as well. There is an additional question on there that really focus on where are there gaps in control, what tools do we have available or do not have available to address existing populations, so that we're not sending out multiple surveys. We're trying to just do everything in one shot, get the information we need so that the subcommittees can continue their work. Okay. Last but not least, we have the Education and Outreach Subcommittee and their work plan elements. So number 1, which was identified as the highest priority for us to get accomplished the year through this subcommittee, was to conduct an assessment of ANS national campaigns and the ANSTF guidelines to evaluate progress of the outreach goals and effectiveness in changing behavior. So what this came down to is we again decided to do a funding opportunity to find someone who really specializes in community-based social marketing, and asked them to do an assessment on the Stop Aquatic Kid Checkers campaign, the Play Clean Go campaign, as well as the Clean Clean Dry initiative, and also how that does trickle down into more state and local campaigns as well. Right now, that notice of funding opportunity has been completed by the committee. We do have a commitment of funding for that work, and so we are just waiting for the final approval from the Fish and Wildlife Director. Once we receive that, we will be able to post on grants.gov and hopefully find a qualified applicant to conduct that work for us. The next bullet here is to finish the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers portal to serve as a clearinghouse for campaign materials. I'm happy to announce that portal has been completed. It is currently live on the site. However, right now our task is going to be to actually compile the materials from our partners, review them, and get them uploaded for everyone to see and to share. So again, something that will trickle over into next year. Next bullet here is to develop templates for ANS messaging and briefing, pretty much just to assure that everyone who is representing the task force is doing so in a very consistent manner to making sure we're getting the right talking points out there. We do have drafts of those, both of those right now that are ready for review and discussion at our December meeting. One that is ready to kick off hopefully soon is to define and identify leaders of ANS community of practice. And this comes from the idea is one thing I think this subcommittee quickly recognizes we don't have a shortage of outreach out there. We have outreach going on at the national level, the state level, the regional level, the local level. So we do think it is important to have that forum that anyone who's involved with outreach can share ideas. They can learn how to evaluate. They can learn from one another by sharing things that have worked well, tools, methods. So we are just trying to kind of wrap our heads around what this community practice would look like. So expecting that to really take form in the upcoming year. And the last bullet I have on here is to refresh the subcommittee charge document for use for recruitment. Recognizing that this subcommittee tends to be maybe a little bit different from others because it is something that usually people around the task force table don't have the right expertise to participate and contribute to. We are a task force mainly of biologists and natural resource managers. However, for outreach, you usually do need people who specialize in communications or marketing. So we are identifying and tasking our member organizations to look among themselves and try to nominate someone with that right now expertise to participate on this committee. And with that comes the charge document that they can share among their staff members that really outlines what this committee is, what we're trying to do, and of course the potential commitment that you would be able to if you were to be part of this committee. So again, just gives them a taste for what they'd be signing up for if they agree to participate. So again, something in draft that hopefully will be finalized relatively soon here. And with that, hopefully I stay within my 10 minutes, but it was a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Of course, here's my contact information if you want to contact me directly. Also, just for general information about the task force or strategic plan, the committees, work products, please visit the website. And of course, we are still putting out that weekly newsletter with task force news and announcements. So please, if you're interested, subscribe to our newsletter. And with that, I will turn it over to any questions if there's time.
Susan, we'll do question and answers for all the different presentations towards the end, which isn't much longer. I think we got about a half an hour or so left. But thank you. Appreciate your leadership on all of this. It's been a long road, I know, but thank you for getting all the coordination and multiple participants to take part of the update. And as I mentioned, we try to craft our recommendations to the task force to make sure we're trying to achieve all those goals that you mentioned. So thank you very much. And now
couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And hopefully we'll get to see you in person sometime in the near future. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Dobroski from the California State Lands Commission to provide an update on VIDA. Good afternoon, Nicole. And Mason, if you could make her the presenter. Thank you.
I actually don't have slides. I'm just going to talk to you all. So we'll make it easy.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'm giving an update on the vessel. My name is Nicole Dobroski. I'm with the California State Lands Commission and I'm manager of the Marine Invasive Species Program. I'm going to give everyone an update on the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, known as VIDA or VIDA. potato, depends how you want to call it. VIDA is a part of the Frank Lobiondo Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2018. That bill was signed on December 4th of 2018. VIDA, just a little bit of background, VIDA provides authority to the US EPA to set standards of performance for discharges incidental to the normal operation of a vessel. EPA has 2 years to adopt those regulations after the bill was signed, so they have until December 4th of this year to get their regulations finalized, which at this point probably isn't going to happen. Following adoption of the EPA regulations, the United States Coast Guard has 2 years to adopt implementation and enforcement regulations. Those are due by December 4th of 2022. The VIDA is not in effect until the Coast Guard regs are finalized and have entered into force. At that time, states will be preempted from having standards, discharge standards that are more stringent than the federal standards. Under VIDA, states retain the right to charge a fee for ballast water programs up to $1,000 per qualifying arrival, to collect ballast water management reports, to inspect vessels and enforce upon violations. States can also petition EPA for stricter standards. And EPA, United States Coast Guard, are required to engage in consultation with the states during the adoption of regulations. And so that's kind of just a very, very brief summary of some of the provisions of VIDA, but it's a kind of a complex law that requires close reading. So just as a bit of an update on where we are right now, EPA did engage in some consultation with the states last year through webinars and phone calls. Oregon, the states of Oregon, Washington, California, and Hawaii submitted a multi-state letter to the EPA in September of 2019, discussing some of our concerns and comments about adoption of the proposed standards related to ballast water and biofouling. VIDA itself will cover a large number of discharges, 23, 28, perhaps even more, I've lost track. But primarily, the states have been working together on ballast water and biofouling at this time. There was a follow-up call with EPA in January of this year, but since then, there hasn't been much communication with the states. Obviously, COVID played a huge role in that, but in general, we've just been waiting for EPA to submit their proposed regulations or to have them published in the Federal Register for public comment. We do know that the proposed regulations were submitted to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, on July 2nd of this year. OMB has 90 days to review the proposed regs, and so that time period ends on September 30th, which is coming up pretty soon. I've been in touch with Jack Falk from EPA. I don't even know if he's on the line today, but he was on the line kind of earlier in the meeting. He said that the proposed rule is likely to get signed by OMB next week and then released thereafter. Jack said that he would post a pre-publication copy of the regs after the signature was received, and that they will notify the states when that happens. So right now, at least the states of Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and California, we already had a pre-planning meeting to discuss reviewing and preparing comments. We are assuming that the public comment period will be extremely short. Under federal law, it could be as short as 30 days. We're hoping that they extend that out to more like 45 to 60 days. But we know they're trying to push things through as fast as they can, since they're probably already going to be late with their mandate under VIDA to get those regs finalized. The states have also asked Jack to provide a table comparing the existing discharge standards requirements under the 2013 Vessel General Permit versus the proposed regulations. He said our request was reasonable, but he can't offer any guarantees, but he will try to work to make that happen. One of the reasons we're pushing for that is simply that if there's a 30-day comment period, let's say, or a very short time comment period, there's not going to be a lot of time to make the comparison between the status quo, which is the Vessel General Permit, and the proposed regs. And that's where we really need to kind of hone in and see where the changes are from where we are right now. On the Coast Guard side of things, VIDA required Coast Guard to form various work groups with the states to discuss implementation and enforcement under VIDA. The first meeting of the VIDA Ballast Water Reporting and Enforcement Data Working Group was held on December 4th last year. They got it in just under the nose. They were required to have the first meeting within a year, and they held it right on a year to the date. We've had 2 additional meetings since then, so it's pretty much Coast Guard meeting with any state that wants to get involved. So it's not just West Coast states or Western states. There's Great Lakes states involved, Connecticut, Rhode Island, some of the New England states. And so pretty much any state in the country that wants to be involved in the process can do so, working with the United States Coast Guard on this. We plan to continue to be having quarterly meetings as long as necessary during the implementation and adoption process. So far, the Coast Guard has provided states with an access to vessel tracking system through the Automatic Identification System, AIS data, not to be confused with aquatic invasive species. There's 2 AISs out there, at least when it comes to vessels. And some training will be provided on the use of that system next Monday through Wednesday. So if you're out there and you need access to vessel tracking, so these are large commercial vessels, not small vessels, please reach out to me as soon as possible, and I can put you in touch with the appropriate Coast Guard representatives to take part of that training session. Also, the National Ballast Information Clearinghouse, NBIC, has provided states with real-time access to submitted ballast water management reports. This is huge because many states aren't able to process those reports in a timely fashion. There's too many forms coming in, too many arrivals, and being able to see, have the staffing at all to even enter that into a database isn't possible for a lot of states. So now states have real-time access to that data. It has not been quality controlled with the real-time access, but at least there's information about vessels coming in and their intended ballast water management practices. So that info is just available to states, but there is a public access portal that posts the information from the ballast water management reports 20 days after submission. So by then, NBIC has had a chance to quality control the data, and then that data becomes available to everyone. And so this really has been a big improvement in transparency and with the information coming into the United States Coast Guard. Coast Guard is gathering information right now from the various states on the extent of existing programs to prevent the introduction of non-Indigenous species from vessels. We've heard presentations in the meeting from Oregon, Washington. I provided one for California. Hawaii provided one. I'm guessing there'll be some more from probably the Great Lakes states and New England states coming up at the next meeting. And the work group has a governing memo kind of indicating overall goals and methods of operation. Right now, the group is only focused on ballast water, but we will likely expand to other discharges in the future. Lieutenant Commander Brian Watts is the lead with Coast Guard, and if anyone has any interest in getting involved with that, let me know. Generally, there's only 1 or 2 reps per state, so you might want to check with your state reps first, because they don't want the group to get too big. But it's been a positive working experience so far. So that's all I have for now. Really, right now, what we're waiting for is the proposed EPA regulations next week, which will set discharge standards. We'll be, honing in on probably ballast water and biofouling the most, at least at our agency level, but certainly there are many water quality issues as well associated with underwater hull husbandry, cleaning of biofouling on the undersides of vessels. The use of ballast water treatment systems has many potential water quality issues, but there'll be everything covered from aqueous firefighting foam to deck runoff. So it's a huge slew of discharges that come out of vessels during their operation, and so it'll be a large proposed regulation package, and we'll have to look at it closely. So that's all I have for right now, and sounded like we're holding on comments till later. Dennis, do you want me to introduce Stephen?
I'll go ahead and do it, but thank you, Nicole. Appreciate all your commitment to this issue. I know that's been a lot of work, and I think you've had a lot of help from Alan Ployce in the state of Washington and Christiani as well. But thank you for continuing to provide us updates on this subject.
Great, thanks, Dennis.
Continue to follow your guidance there. And yeah, we will, if there's any questions for Nicole, please use the question feature to ask any questions of any of the presenters today. So now I am going to turn it over to the absent-minded professor, as it were. If you notice the typo on that first page, Stephen Phillips is not really with the Washington State University Extension, but he is our Quagga czar, and he is going to give us an update from the legislative front. So take it away, Stephen. We can't hear you.
Thank you, Dennis. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you. And we can see your screen.
And you can see me?
Yes, most important, we can see you.
That's what I was about to say. So since I'm a Washington State Cougar now, nothing says hip like Pullman, Washington. So I'm going to slow things down a little and put on my sunglasses. And you guys will run the slides. So here's our annual legislative update. Next slide, please. Okay, first we're going to talk about appropriations for FY 2021. FY 2021 starts October 1st. Oh my, that's in about 2 weeks. Next. Okay, so in the House, there weren't a lot of changes from last year. The House Appropriations Bill was introduced on July 14th. You can find more details about the FY 21 appropriations for the House in the July 20th issue of the AIS News, and there's the website to get there. So what happened in FY 21? It's similar to FY 20. FY 20 in red there. That's what for aquatic invasive species in the Fish and Wildlife Service. We kept the $40 million line. As you can see in FY19, that's where we made the big jump. FY19 to FY20, we went from 21 to 40. And then under that are the FY21 numbers, and they are similar to FY20. So the gains that we made that you saw, one of them being the QZAP RFP that Barack just put out, that number went up. And that's because our numbers went up last year in FY20. So thanks to the Fish and Wildlife Service for taking that congressional appropriators recommendation and putting it into action. And I think some of the states have also gotten more state plan money. So that's good. So as you can see, there are your numbers. The only thing that really changed, it was more money for contract fishing and controlling Asian carp. You can see there's $3 million this year and there was 2.5 last year. And then everything else looks like it did last year. Now this is just the House. Next slide, please. Here's Energy and Water for the Corps of Engineers and WRDA. Again, that's where you can, if you want to look further into this appropriations bill, it's on westernas.org. And once again, we're going to get $15 million for watercraft inspection like we did last year. $3 million for monitoring, similar to last year. The House this time mentions flowering rush. And if you remember last year, it's the Senate that used to set aside $1 million for flowering rush. But they also added hydrilla. Any trouble that we had spending flowering rush money will quickly disappear. This is a nationwide program. You add hydrilla in there, and I talk to the weed people, they say yes. Hydrilla funding can be used up very quickly. So we will see in the end if this hydrilla language sticks when they go to conference. I bet it will. So that's significant that hydrilla has been added. And the good news is that watercraft inspection and monitoring are both funded as they were last year. I just threw in some more report language from the bill. And this is something that appeared in the House, in the Interior Appropriations, I think starting last year when the Democrats came into power, the hesitancy of using chemical methods to get rid of aquatic plants. And what this does is it says non-chemical. Hang on, I'm checking. So that's interesting. We'll see what that leads to, but as I said, that top paragraph is kind of where the action is. Next slide, please. Also in the energy and water appropriations for FY 2021, there's some Asian carp language. I didn't put it in. Asian carp dispersal barrier, didn't put it in. What I did do here is this is for the West Coast anyway, and for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, Dungeness crab. Harmful algal blooms are a big deal. Pseudonetia, and so there's money set aside in there for the Corps to participate in that. There's also, if you follow harmful algal blooms down in Florida and in Lake Erie, it's a big issue. And there's an act that we're actually working on trying to reauthorize, but it encourages the Corps to work with the task force under ABARCA. Next slide, please. Okay, Senate 21 federal appropriations, no bills released. The bills are done and they're ready for markup, but they haven't been final and they haven't been brought out yet. So what does that all mean? So it looks like we're going to go to a continuing resolution. And let me bring up the Hill here. You can't see. 2 minutes, Trump asked chamber. Okay, so this is the appropriations for FY21. As you know, we've got under 2 weeks before the fiscal year runs out. As we speak, the last thing I saw on the Hill was lawmakers struggle to clinch deal in government funding. And then everybody in the next few days is going to run around with their hands up in the air and say, oh my God, the government's going to shut down. I don't think the government's going to shut down. And it's an election year. They'll get some kind of deal done. The interesting part will be if they're going to be able to get that COVID relief, the third COVID relief package done. They're both are drawing hard lines in the sand. They do want to get a deal done. But it could be that we get a continuing resolution past the election, maybe through December, and we'll get that third COVID relief package. I don't know. But usually when they start saying, oh my God, it's the end of the world, they're really close to getting a deal done. Okay, next slide, please. And very exciting this year, WRDA is being reauthorized again. Next slide. Remember in 2018 with the WRDA reauthorization, which we refer to as the expansion, that there was a type error in there where they referred to an Arizona river basin that should have been the Arkansas River Basin. Next slide, please. So that will be fixed. And this is the House Bill 7575, introduced by Peter DeFazio. And even before the Democrats took over the House in 2018, DeFazio was always a great ally and also worked with the Republicans on this bill. WRDA is always very popular. Between Democrats and Republicans, somehow it stays out of the mess. Yes, I think there's going to be a 2020 WRDA passed and lame duck easily. And it's like a 90% chance. What they did add, interestingly, is they fixed Arizona, made that Arkansas, and they add the Russian River Basin. Now, I know some of you may think this is maybe part of the conspiracy, and that the Russians are affecting WRDA, but no. There's a Russian, if you didn't know, there's a Russian River Basin in California, a great steelhead stream, used to be, still is. And we'll show a map here in a moment. And then it looks like it's cut off a little bit there in the end, but in terms of an update on invasive species policy guidance, you'll see high altitude lakes, California. Oh, Lake Tahoe. And the Tennessee and Cumberland River basins. So you could take a look at that further, and that may influence what happens in future work for the Corps of Engineers in those basins. Next slide, please. So this is what the WRDA basin map will look like if everything gets passed with that Russian river language, and the Arkansas now be fixed. So Corps of Engineers can start a letter report on that. There's the Russian River Basin. They're north of San Francisco. So that's what we're looking like. And next slide, please. Now, why the Russian River Basin? Very interesting. So 10 years ago, about starting 10 years ago, when many of us started shopping around for where are we going to get aquatic invasive species money in the West? Where can we get can we get a standalone bill? Can we get reauthorization in the National Invasive Species Act to add something for the West Coast? We got WRDA, and WRDA was championed in part by Mike Thompson, and in part right here, you're looking at part of Mike Thompson's district. Interesting, huh? Now, the Russian River, it's not that big, but it takes water out of the Eel River at the Potter Valley Project, which I followed for 20 plus years. When you start throwing salmon in here, and the water that goes from the Eel to the Russian is really important for irrigation further south. And I believe that's also grapes too, and that's big bucks. So you want to protect those headwaters. So one of the reasons that, it's not only the Russian River, but also protect that Potter Valley Project. And we get, if we do what we do down with some of the other watercraft inspection stations, we get protection of the eel, which is a much larger watershed. And again, very important for salmon and steelhead. So this is good. And imagine California Department of Fish and Game and Martha, or if this goes through, they'll be busy working on this. So let's see what happens. Next slide, please. Just a little, this is some report language in the same House bill, the reauthorization of WRDA, and so these bills, what they'll do is they'll authorize appropriation. Doesn't mean you get it, but as you can see, there's ABC there. See that arrow? There's ABC, 30 million, 30 million, 30 million. But what it doesn't do is include the Russian River. It doesn't have D4 to protect the Russian River. It doesn't have that $30 million. That's why I pointed that out. And really, for right now, I don't think that's a big deal. There's plenty of money to do the letter report for the Russian River Basin, however the Corps is going to want to do it. The other thing I highlighted, and this is something that's really come to light in the last, it's been 6 months, 6 months of COVID, is that the match of 50% for the Corps of Engineers that they require, non-federal match for the monitoring and watercraft inspection, that may be / will be a little bit more difficult going forward in the next couple of years as states have to wrestle with economic downturn. The closest I can think of what is happening now with state budgets is back to the 2008 banking crash. And that eventually got its way into state and then federal budgets years later. State first, federal later. I'm sure all of you state agency people know that there's been cuts. So next year, when we do WRDA 2022, do we in the West, what do we think of a 75-25 switch? And there's to the match. And there's a lot of opinions on that. So that will be an upcoming discussion for the next 6 months. Next slide, please. In the Senate, they put a lot into S3591. John Barrasso called the America Water Infrastructure Act of 2020. It's basically WRDA reauthorization. You can go to Western AIS News, see the May 4th edition. They've got a section on invasive species in impaired waters. They added LOD and quagga mussels to the species for research, added the Arctic region. Very interesting, $10 million in appropriations for fiscal years 21 through 24 to support watercraft inspection stations along the U.S. border with Canada. So I read that as Alaska, Canada, Minnesota, Canada, etc. So very interesting. Also, this section authorizes the Secretary to carry out a pilot program in collaboration with the states in the upper Missouri River Basin. I guess the good news, those of us who are doing this, that a lot of that work's going on already. So that's good, it's fine. Next slide, please. In addition, there's some language on terrestrial noxious weeds, invasive species assessment, South Florida ecosystem, Asian carp prevention, aquatic invasive species prevention for carp, that they expand the language and talk about all 6 subbasins. So you carp people know about this. I know that there's often been, I call them negotiations on who gets what money in the Mississippi and Missouri, and I think maybe this will, in Ohio, I guess, too, basins, but hopefully this will help straighten all that out. I don't know. And then invasive species in alpine lakes pilot program. Lake Tahoe would be one of those. Next, please. On the Senate WRDA reauthorization, they did not include any report language. And the reason I called this out, in past years, they would put the flowering rush language, $1 million shall be for flowering rush, nationwide control program and survey, because it got changed in 2018. But they didn't release report language this time. There's all the slides I just showed you, there's plenty in there to bite off on. So I think we'll be fine. Once this goes to conference, it all comes out the end. I think everybody will get what they want. So it's kind of exciting. Next, please. Okay, some other legislation that we've been watching, kind of some surprises and disappointments. Go ahead. S47, you guys have probably seen this recently because it's the Dingle Conservation Management Recreation Act, and in that is the Invasive Species Strategic Plan, which is currently undergoing public comment. You should have seen an email on that already. If not, contact Hillary Smith. These are the bills that are still active. I got that in quotes. The Nutria bill, it passed the House by voice vote. That means, and you guys know, when it's voice vote, that means it's not that controversial. Yeah, let's kill the rats. The Senate, it was introduced, it's there, and it's sitting there. The House often cranks out a lot of bills, and the Senate just kind of goes, eh. So we'll see. Hope this, and I'll kind of wrap this into some of the other things that are going on here at the end of the legislative year. This S4338, this was just released last week. The date today, the week before last. This is a Jobs Corps Act from Dick Durbin, Senator from Illinois, and it's got a price tag of $55 billion. And you're looking at that and going, huh? $55 billion? Why? Well, perhaps it will get tied into the third COVID relief package. So folks are throwing out these bills with big price tags, and they're hoping, I think, that they get taken up. And this, you know, for us, this would be great. I mean, we've talked about Conservation Corps before, bringing this back. That's a big chunk of dough. It would create jobs. It's a stimulus type thing. So, and this type of thing, I bet we see it in the next Congress as well. Next, please. Stop and spread the SIMS Act. This is the Bennett bill that was going to bring the Bureau of Reclamation kind of into the WRDA world, the match world. And we really thought when this came out that this was going to get legs, that it was going to get attached to WRDA. And that has not happened so far. Now, remember, I did mention there was no report language on the WRDA Senate side for that bill. Will this get slipped in? I don't think so. I'm hoping this isn't dead, and then we'll have to huddle and see whether we want to see what the senator wants to do to reintroduce this next time. There's more to the story, but we don't have time to talk about it. The biggie in terms of money for Fish and Wildlife agencies is RAWA, Recovering America's Wildlife Act in 2019. It appeared to be dead. But then along came COVID, And then along came a vehicle, the Moving Forward Act, which is a big transportation bill, billions, hundreds of billions. And so smartly, people attached this to that bill, and this is the one that has $1.3 billion for fish and game agencies. And part of it can be used for invasive species. So there's a chance here. And RAWA is not going to go away. This is something we're going to work in the next Congress as well. Next slide, please. America's Conservation Enhancement Act, again, this was one of the surprises out of the blue, and it's probably because I'm not part of really this coalition or commission. It's not on my list, but this was passed by the Senate a couple days ago. This bill has a lot of stuff in it. The Western Native Trout Initiative is associated with this. National Fish Habitat Partnership Program, North American Wetlands Conservation Fund, wasting disease. There's a lot of things in here. And somebody, don't know who, put in money for Corps of Engineers for invasive species. You say 2.5 million for the Secretary of the Army, and 2.5 also for the Secretary of Interior for invasive species. So that's good. Now, there's a bill, HR 925, that's in the House that parts of that bill have already been passed, but what they need to do is schedule it right now. So the big deal is now, it's the 18th, clock's ticking, they got 10 days. So the last I just saw this morning, breaking news, is that it looks like on the 28th of September, they've got a vote scheduled in the House on HR 925. This would be huge for Fish and Wildlife agencies. So again, kind of taking advantage of the end of the year, and this legislation has a lot of backing behind it from environmental groups, the state Fish and Wildlife agencies. So it's a good deal. Next, please. Now, if you are interested in following legislation on our Western AIS website, we have regulations. This is Robin Drawheim's table, and you can go and look on Congress at the bottom of the page of that regulations page. We have the 115th and the current 116th. Also, if you see something that you want to see updated, you can also email Robin as well. And I think that may do it. Next slide. And that picture I took from my daughter's apartment, and it is now another reason to have the sunglasses on. We had a 1/10 of a mile visibility yesterday, and today we were up to 5 miles. The rain came, and we're about to get another big shot of rain here. For you fish and game people, we had to let a lot of fish go from hatcheries that were supposed to be kept till later in the year. But the good news is this, right where the fires were, on the west side of the Cascades there in the foothills, where the hatcheries are there, and in the Willamette Valley, this rain's going to help push those fish a little bit so they won't all get predated upon. So a little bit of good news from the Smoky West. So thank you, and I'll answer questions as they come up.
All right, thank you, Stephen. As always, thank you for your following of this issue and all the technical language and congressional political hoo-ha that happens, but really appreciate your leadership on all this. And so, like Stephen said, if there's any questions, let him know, or Robin Drawheim. But we'll move into the Q&A session now. We don't have a lot, but if there are any other questions, please feel free to type them in. But we'll just start from the beginning. And the first real question, other than congratulations to Elizabeth, and is from Christine Moffett. Mason, is the webinar license good for the full year? You're on mute.
Yes, we've got it until July 30th, 2021. So it's a 12-year license, 12-month license.
And I think we'll look at other means and platforms that may have better tools for us, but we've got some flexibility there. So, and look for ways that can help offset the cost, because I think in the future, when we are in person, fingers crossed, we'll still want to be able to provide a platform for those that can't travel. Budgets are going to be tight for the next several years, most likely from the states and feds perspectives. And so we'll look for continued ways to encourage participation on multiple fronts. And then I think this question is for Elizabeth from Adam Sepulveda. What, if any, are the consequences of where an objective is placed in QZAP? For example, does it ultimately matter if risk assessment is in research versus early detection?
Hi, Adam. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. You know what? I don't know. And I've asked myself that same question. I don't think there's really an impact to whether it's in one section or another. That's just my thought on it. And I'm certainly open to other ideas, but we tried to put them where it seemed like they made the most sense at the end of the day, where as many folks as possible thought they should be. And risk assessment was a tricky one in that some folks thought that really should be in monitoring because it drives your sampling frequency and quantity depending on the risk. Other folks really thought it needed to be in prevention and containment because it drives whether or not you're going to do maybe mandatory versus voluntary inspection and decon. And so ultimately that particular one landed in research because a risk assessment is a research project and will be used to inform various levels of management, such as, early detection as well as WID or even education and outreach. So ultimately, I think the objective is to do a risk assessment, and whoever seeks to do that, I don't think it matters what category it's in. So I hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. And Adam, if there was additional follow-up to that, go ahead and type it in, or perhaps just contact Elizabeth directly to provide any other further details on that.
And I did add the language that you suggested, Adam, to that risk assessment objective in research. So thank you for that. I did add that in.
Cool, thank you. Next question is from Christine Moffitt for Nicole. Just if you can share the Coast Guard website for the public access component. I think that's something we can handle via email or maybe even post in the chat here. But in any case, we'll get that to you, Christine. And from Jolene, she likes your sunglasses, Stephen. And then from Mark Sitzma, also liking your cat and commenting on the Cougs. But his question is, given the lack of report language in WRDA, what is the chance that funds for FR, gosh, I should know what that stands for, but
Flowering Rush.
Flowering Rush, yes, thank you. Chances that funds for the Flowering Rush will be diverted to hydrilla.
Say the diverted.
Yeah,
say that again.
Given the lack of report language in WRDA, what is the chance that the funds for Flowering Rush will be diverted to hydrilla?
Well, what it comes down to is getting a plan ready, up and going. So Flowering Rush, we could have done fall work maybe this year, but we didn't. So next year is when Flowering Rush is going to start. Hydrilla still needs to be added. It shouldn't take that long. But I would think for the what you have to look at also, Mark, as you know, is original intent. And this was a Merkley-Wyden ask. So they're going to want to make sure that Flowering Rush stays as part of the portfolio of the Corps. So I think we'll be okay. And if I had to guess on the hydrilla part, let's say that all that is going to be lame duck. It's going to be December. Then we go on Christmas break. Then a new Congress. So by the time things kind of get rolling on adding hydrilla to the package, Flowering Rush should be well underway in the Columbia River Basin and elsewhere. I think there's one Flowering Rush project right now going on in Niagara, Lake Ontario area. So I think we'll be okay.
Thanks again, Stephen. And then just a thank you shout out from Nick from Idaho. Thank you for those comments and kind words, Nick. But that's all the questions we have. And so if anyone else has additional comments for any of the presenters today, but from previously in the week, please feel free to email Mason and myself. All of these sessions have been recorded and will be available for live viewing later. And I think that will conclude the Q&A session. Oh, Mark just posted, have to watch them because Hydrilla is a giant black hole for money.
Amen.
Thanks, Mark. But again, these sessions are being recorded and will be available, as well as the slides, I believe, Mason, if that's correct. And I'll conclude the Q&A session and just kind of wrap things up in order to adjourn. And so thanks everyone for participating in this first ever virtual annual meeting, and fingers crossed and looking forward to 2021 and seeing you all in person in Alaska. And so just a couple things I wanted to mention, and my apologies for not mentioning some of these things earlier, but also on the WRP annual meeting Facebook page, Quagga D put up a nice tribute video for when, so it's very sweet. Please check that out. And I want to thank the annual meeting committee members. I failed to do that earlier, and so thank you all for all your hard work. Mason from Invasive Species Action Network, Tammy Davis, who was the chair from Alaska, Leah Elwell, also from ISAN, Gordon King from Taylor Shellfish, who's our coastal aquaculture member, Aaron Martin from U.S. Fish and Wildlife in Alaska, Bill Janowski from the Forest Service, Allison Zach from Nebraska, Christiani from California State Lands Commission and our Coastal Committee, Dan Coleman, who I believe is with the state of Alaska, and Martha Volkov from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Michelle Cox, also with the state of Alaska, Tom Booz from Tahoe, my agency, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and Heidi Nora McMaster from BOR. Please, round of applause for all of them virtually. A lot of shifting gears, going from an in-person to a virtual setting, so a lot of hard work, great agenda, great participation. Really, thank you very much. And so I also wanted to thank our moderators for this week, Mason, Christiani, Martha Volkov, and Elizabeth Brown for participating and helping us out through this week, and to all of our presenters all week long. Really great job and very informative and really well done on a virtual setting. And then welcome to Catherine De Rivera. She's the new Coastal Academia member, replacing Mark Sitzma. As many of you may know, he has retired. So an opportunity here to say thank you, Mark, for your long, many years of service to the WRP and your leadership. I believe in San Diego, we got you a birthday cake for your recognizing the 25 years that time that you had served on WRP and also serving in the executive committee. So thank you very much for all your service. And then also welcome to Barak, joining Barak Shemai from Fish and Wildlife Service, who is now serving on our executive committee. And then just look for those opportunities I mentioned earlier on, ways to participate. We've got some important decisions to make from the business side of WRP, so look for those opportunities. And also the mid-year call or virtual call, hopefully in April. So thank you all very much. Miss seeing you all, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you, and enjoy the weekend.